Corporate Finance Practice Problem using Excel. Future value calculation comparing the compounding annually versus quarterly versus monthly. Don't leave profits solely to chance. Instead, use corporate finance. Here we are in Excel. If you have access to the Excel worksheet and would like to follow along, note we are in the Practice tab as opposed to the Example tab. The Example tab, in essence, being the answer key. We're going to do a future value calculation, concentrating here on the difference in the compounding units, that being annual versus semi-annual versus quarterly. We'll do that comparison with a calculation, a mathematical type of calculation. We will then run a running balance for them as well, which is a good look at the differences in a more extended type of format. And then we'll see how it will change in terms of putting it into an Excel formula. And then we'll see how it will change in terms of creating the tables or same calculation with the use of tables, ending it off with the table time. Going back on over to the information on the left, we're going to say that the payment is going to be $15,000. Years will be 10 years. And then the yearly percent, 8%. Now, of course, the years and the percentages are the things that we need to be careful of as we think about the compounding annual versus semi-annual versus quarterly. Let's do the annual one first. That will be the one we've seen before, which will be the more straightforward one where we can simply use the periods of 10 years and 8% versus then next time semi-annual, where those things will have to be adjusted, as well as quarterly, where those things will have to be adjusted. So we're going to start off with the formula. Future value equals present value times 1 plus r to the n. We're going to put that in basically a table type of format. Present value in the outer column. In the inner column, we'll calculate the 1 plus r to the n. So let's go ahead. We're going to say this is the 15,000. And then we're going to pick up the 1 plus r. The r is going to be 8%. So we'll pick up the 8%. We will then percentify the cell by going to the Home tab, Numbers, Percentify, then Home tab, Font Group, and Underline. We will sum this up, equals the SUM of these two items. Then percentify this cell, Home tab, Numbers, Percentify, 108% there. Now the number of periods, this being in years, so we're just going to simply pick up the 10 years. I'll underline that by going to the Home tab, Font Group, and Underline. Pulling this out to the outer column now, this is going to be the 108%. Shift 6, caret to the power of, in other words, the 10 units, in this case years. That being 2, I'm going to add some decimals. Home tab, Font Group, add a few decimals, so it's more exact. Home tab, Font Group, Underline. Let's then take this, we're now multiplying these two outer columns. This is going to be the 15 times that number that we just calculated. There's our 32,384. So if we do it annually, compounding, 32,384. Home tab, Numbers, add a couple decimals. Now let's see what will happen if we go to the semi-annual. I'll make this green. That's the one we're working on. We're working on the green one. And we'll do the same thing down here. We're going to say this is going to be the 15,000. And then we got the 1 plus r to the n. So I'm going to say 1 plus r. R is now, the rate will not be the yearly rate because we have to match up the rate to the periods that will be used. So we have a semi-annual. That's going to be every 6 months. So we need a 6-month rate or a half a year rate. So therefore we have the 8%. If we line that up to the periods being used, we got to divide that by 2 for the 4%. So we're going to take our rate down there, which is going to be the yearly rate, 8%. Divided by 2 to give us that 4%. Let's percentify this cell. Home tab, Numbers, Percentify. We'll also underline it. Home tab, Font Group, and Underline. This is often the confusing component here. Also note that although it's not as commonly known or it's not as commonly explained, when we hear the percent given normally, our convention is that we're talking about a yearly percent. Kind of like if someone told you what their salary is, we would usually kind of assume they're talking about like a yearly salary, even if they didn't say it. If they said just a number like 65,000, we'd probably say yearly salary. If they say something like an 8% rate, we would assume it's a yearly rate unless they tell us it's something other than a yearly rate typically. And so when you go down here and match up what your compounding period is, make sure that you're picking that rate up properly. The reason we might do that, one reason we kind of do that, is because the yearly rate will typically be within a reasonable range here. When we start talking about monthly rates or daily rates or even quarterly rates or yearly rates and whatnot, then we get to pretty small numbers which are difficult to just express So the convention will typically be the yearly rate, and then we've got to do something to it if we're dealing with periods something other than a year. So that's what we've done here. We're going to sum this up then. This equals the SUM of these two items. Let's go ahead and percentify this cell, go into the Home tab, numbers, percentify. Then we're going to take that to the number of periods. Once again, they gave us the periods in years, but then told us that it's going to be semi-annual on the compounding. Therefore, we're going to be compounding every 6 months. The periods will not be a yearly period, but 6-month period. So if we have 10 years, we're going to double that to get to the number of periods on the semi-annual. So we're going to be taking the 10 times 2 there, 10 times 2. And so there's the number of periods. Let's underline that, Home tab, font group, and underline. And then we'll bring this out to the outer column. This is going to be the 104 caret, which is shift 6 to the 20 periods. And let's add some decimals, Home tab, font numbers, adding decimals, and underline, Home tab, font, underline. And then we're going to go ahead and say this is equal to 15,000 times that number. Add a couple decimals there as well. Home tab, number, add a couple decimals. So now we can see the difference if we were to compound then yearly up top, and then we're compounding semi-annual down below. We come up to a different result. Note, as you compare these two, you got to be careful as well, because someone might give you a comparison with the same interest rate. They're going to say it's an interest rate as if it's a yearly rate, and then use the same 8% for a semi-yearly rate, as opposed to us, cutting that rate in half, and that would be a much more substantial difference between the two. So on this difference between the two, we basically took the rate, the yearly rate, and we cut it in half, and then we took the number of periods and doubled the periods. If they were to double the periods and keep the same rate, now making it the semi-annual rate, then you would have a different outcome. But this still gives us a difference in the outcome as well. We'll see that difference more clearly when we do the running balance calculation. Now let's think about it in terms of quarterly. So we're going to have the same starting point here, same starting point. And then I'm going to say this is going to be 1 plus the rate. Now the rate is 8% per year again. If it's quarterly, I have to take that and divide it by 4. And that'll give us the rate for every 3 months, the rate for every quarter of a year. So this is going to be then equal to that rate of the 8% divided by 4. And then let's percentify that cell, Home tab, numbers, percentify it. And then do we need no decimals needed. And then we'll underline it, Home tab, font group, and underline. Let's sum this up then, equals the sum. There we have that. We'll percentify this cell, percentifying that cell, Home tab, numbers, percentified. Then we're going to take this to the number of periods. Now, once again, they gave us the period in years, but we're talking quarterly now. I should ungreenify this one because we're on this one, quarterly. And so the 10 times 4 will give us the every 3-month period, every quarter period. So we'll take the 10 times 4 for the number of periods. This is going to be equal to the 10 times 4, otherwise 40. And we'll take the Home tab, font group, and underline that. And then let's take this and do the calculation, 102 to the power of shift 6, the caret of 40. Adding some decimals there, Home tab, numbers, decimalizing it. And then underline, Home tab, font, and underline, multiplying out, this being the 15,000 times that 2.20, and so on. Adding a couple decimals here, Home tab, numbers, add a couple decimals. There's the 33, 120.59. You can see, once again, it being a little bit different up here. Also note that if someone was to give you the same rate of 8%, for example, down here, using the same rate as we had with the yearly rate to the quarterly rate, we would have a much more significant difference here. We are taking the yearly rate, breaking it down now to a quarterly rate, as well as the yearly period, breaking it down to a quarterly period. Let's see that in terms of a running balance now, running balance calculation. We'll go back to scenario 1, where we're just going to have periods 1 through 10. So we'll say, I'm going to say 1, 2, and then highlight them down, 10 periods. Home tab, alignment, centering that. We're going to start off with our starting point of the 15,000, and then just calculate the interest, which would be the 15,000 times the rate of 8%, because it's a yearly rate that we're working with first. This would then be the 15,000 plus the 1,002. The second period would be the 16,2 times the 8%. And this would then be the prior balance plus the interest. We could see it growing. Let's go ahead and copy this down. In order to do so, I need to make an absolute reference of that interest cell. So if I double click on that B4 right there, we need that to be an absolute reference. I put my cursor in B4 and we put F4 on the keyboard, putting a dollar sign before the B and 4. You only need a mixed reference for picky people out there, but the absolute reference will work. So I'm going to select these two then, and then autofill on down, autofill it on down, and there's the 32,383.87. Let's add a couple decimals just to make it a little bit more exact over here. Home tab numbers, decimalize it. So there we have the exact number there. Let's see what happens if we do it then on a semi-annual. That means that periods will be one, actually, and let me notice I did the periods wrong again. It should be 0, 1, and then adding them down to 10 periods. So at period 0, we have the 15. Let's do that over here. 0, 1, and then autofill this down. And that'll be 20 periods then. 20 periods, I'm going to center that home tab alignment center. And then we'll start off at the same point, the 15. But now when we calculate the interest, it's going to be that 15 times the 8. And then we have to divide it by 2 because the 8% would be yearly. We're talking now semi-annual. So semi-annual, there it is, 600 for the 6-month time period. So this number 1 does not represent 1 year later, but 6 months later. And then it would take that 15,000 plus the 600. Let's do it again. This is going to be equal to the 15,600 times the 8% divided by 2. And that one will give us the 624 and so on and so forth. This equals the 15,600 plus the 624. Let's copy that down. Before we do, however, we need to absolute referenceize the B4 again. So the difference between this formula being the divided by 2 here. So we're going to put our cursor in B4 and select F4 on the keyboard, putting a dollar sign before the B and the 4, and then enter. Once absolutized, we're going to then select those two cells and autofill handle, drag that autofill handle all the way down, calculating this time then the 32,867. Let's select this outer column, add a couple decimals, home tab, numbers group, add a couple decimals. So the 32,866.85 matches out what we have over here. Now let's do it again, same kind of thing, but this time we're going to break it out to quarterly. So now I'm going to start with 0 this time, 1, 2, and then copy that all the way down for the 10 years, which will now be calculated out to the 40 periods, because we're doing them every 3 months, otherwise known as quarterly. So we'll start off with, once again, 15,000. Calculation of the interest as we go would be the 15,000 times the 8%, but that would be for a year. We're doing it quarterly now, dividing by, instead of 2, dividing by 4. So let's take a look at the calculation. We're taking the R2 times B4 divided by 4, and then if we add this up, we're saying that the 15,000 plus the 300 is now the 15,300, which you can see the differences here in the interest calculations as we go, because now we're talking about period 1, period 2, not being years, but rather being quarters, being every 3 months as opposed to every year or every 6 months or every semi-annual. So we're going to take this is going to be times the 8% divided by 4. So there we have it again, and it goes up. As we can see, we got the 15,300 plus the 306. Let's go ahead and copy this down by first clicking on this number and absolute referencing the B4 again. So put our cursor in B4, select F4 on the keyboard. That puts a dollar sign before the B and the 4, making it absolute. And then we can select these two cells and use the old autofill handle to drag it on down, all the way down to the 40 payments down here. I'm going to select the outer column now and percentize it. Home tab, numbers, percentimize it. So now we got the 33,120.59, that matching the 33,120.59 we did in this format. So you can do some comparisons, and this will give you a better idea, hopefully, when you do these running balances. I think it's useful to see what is actually happening with regards to the interest calculations for yearly, semi-yearly, and the quarterly calculation. Let's do it in Excel. What would Excel look like, yearly versus semi-yearly versus quarterly. We'd have the same starting point. It'd be a future value calculation. Future value of the rate. This first one would just simply be the 8%. So we just pick up the 8% there and then comma. And then we got the number of periods, which would be simply 10 because we have 10 years if we're doing the annual one here. And then we'd say comma, comma, because it's not an annuity. And then the last one would be the 15. And enter. There's our 32,383, which matches our yearly item here. So let's double click on that one, put a negative before the F, and flip the sign. Let's do it again. This time, we're going to do semi-annual. So what would be different here? We have the future value, that didn't change. And then the rate, that would change because now we're going to take that 8%, but it's going to be semi-annual. Therefore, I need the semi-annual rate. The rate must match the periods. If the rate is for every 6 months, the period is for every 6 months, the rate needs to be for every 6 months. So I divide that by 2. So the 8% divided by 2, comma, and then we got the number of periods. So the number of periods is no longer 10. That would be yearly, but now it's 20 because it's going to be semi-annual, our periods. The 10 times 2. So that looks like this. So now we got B3 times 2, the 10 times 2, then comma, no payment because it's not an annuity, comma, and then the present value being the 15. I put a negative before the F here so we could flip the sign, making it a positive number. So there's the 32,866.85. That should be our semi-annual, the 32,866.85 here. And then we're going to do quarterly. So same thing, but now quarterly, this is going to be equal to the future value. Double clicking the future value, the rate, scrolling back on over, is going to be that 8%, but now divided by 4 because the rate needs to be the quarterly rate. So I notice it could be a really small number even, but it's fine with an Excel because it'll pick up the really small number. If I'm communicating it to somebody, it's easier to communicate in terms of yearly rates. And then we're going to say comma, number of periods is not 10 anymore, but 10 times 4, 40 periods because we're doing this quarterly. And you might think, well, I divided by 4 and I multiplied by 4 here. So you'd think if it was just multiplication that it might come out the same, but it's not. It's a function here, so it's not exactly going to come out exactly the same here because of that. So we're going to say comma, comma. The present value is going to be the 15. I'm going to put a negative before the F to flip the sign, making it a positive number as a result. And there we have the 33,120.59. Back on over, here's the 33,120.59. So once again, note the tricky thing that people could do is use the same rate and then compound. So using the 8% for the yearly rate and then using the same 8% for a quarterly, for a semi-annual and quarterly rate, and you would have more drastic differences between these calculations if that was indeed the case. So that's what you want to kind of be on the lookout for that. Okay, so now let's do it with a table. Same kind of thing with the tables. Let's start off with the yearly table. So I'd start off with the 15,000, and then I'd look at my table. It's just yearly, so it would be 8% and 10. 8 and 10. 8 and 10. Table's way down here. So I'm going to say 8 and 10 would be 2.1589. 2.1589. 2.1589. 2.1589. 2.1589. 2.1589. Adding decimals, home tab, numbers, decimalize in it, and then underline, home tab font, underline, multiplying. This equals to 15 times that number we just got to. Adding a couple decimals there, home tab, numbers, decimalize. There is our 32,383.5. Close to this number, not exact because the tables are rounding to 4 digits. Let's do it again. We're going to say 15,000 again, this time semi-annual. What do I got to do with the table? Well, the table was 10 years, so now we're talking 20 years and not 8% anymore, but 4%. So remember, the table represents periods, not years. So you just got to make sure that you got the right periods lined up to the proper interest rates. If we're talking 20 semi-annual, 26-month periods, then the rate will be the semi-annual rate, which would be 4%. So 4% and 20, 4 and 20, 4 and 20. So there's the 420s down here. 2.1911, 2.1911, 2.1911, 2.1911, 2.1911, adding some decimals, home tab number, add a couple decimals, and then home tab font underline, and then we'll multiply that out. The 15,000 times that 2.1911, add a couple decimals here, home tab numbers, decimalized. And that one is the 32,866.50, close to the 32,866.85, a little bit different due to the rounding, due to this being taken out only to 4 digits. Let's do the last one more time, and then we have to stop, even though this is good times. This is the last one, so enjoy it. We got then the 10 periods, now quarterly, so we're going to take that times 4, so we're talking 40 periods. You have to have the matching interest rate, 8%, then divided by 4 would be 2. Now note that if you have a book problem, the tables down here are severely limited for the percentages, meaning they don't have any decimal point percentages, which you would have if you're breaking things down, or you could commonly have if you're breaking things down to months or days or semi-annual. So just note that a book problem will give you some limited information because they're forced to by the tables if they do compounding in something other than annual. So just be aware of that. It might simplify things. In any case, that'll bring this down to 8 divided by 4 or 2. So we're talking 2 and 40. 2 and 40. 240. So here's the 2, and the 40 is going to be down here at the 2.2080. 2.2080. 2.2080. 2.2080. 2.2080. And 2.2080. Adding some decimals, home tab, numbers decimalized, and then home tab font underlined, and then multiplying the 15,000 times the 2.2080 and decimalizing it, home tab numbers decimalized. There's the 33,120, which is close to the 33,120.59, not exact. Why? Because this one's rounded to 4 digits, and that's rounding difference. So these can give you some of the differences. If a book problem forces you to use the tables, be aware of the tables. It takes a little time to kind of understand the periods and the interest rates on the tables, as well as these formulas too. They all take a little bit of time, so spend some time with different compounding methods and make sure you understand what you're going to do for whatever situation you're in when you're using them.